Peptides, Retatrutide, Methylene Blue, nutrition strategies for shift workers, choosing food selections, and steroids in pro football. We got some good questions coming in for this week's Q&A, so I got some good feedback on the last one. Had a lot of questions come in this week, so I think I'm going to do these Q&As every 2 to 3 weeks. If you guys sent in a question, or if you're just here listening to the discussion, appreciate you guys tuning in. I took the questions in on Instagram yesterday on Friday. It is Saturday morning as I'm recording this right now. So I'm going to record this, put a thumbnail together, chop it up, put it out there on the YouTubes for you guys to enjoy. Funny where life takes you. A year ago at this time, I was probably in a locker room getting ready for a college football game as a strength and conditioning coach. And here I am on a Saturday morning doing Q&As on YouTube. And I wouldn't have it any other way. I freaking love this. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. So without further ado, I'm going to throw in a little Zinachino, and we're going to dive into these questions. I'm just shooting from the hip. There's no editing on this thing. I've glanced over the questions. There's some good ones, but I'm just going to kind of free flow this. So let's see. Question number 1. Meal before early morning lifting. Any protein or just some quick carbs, then protein after. So if you're somebody who's going to wake up, 4 a.m., something like that, that early bird workout special. Now, let me start with this. Generally speaking, for a training session, I do much prefer to train with something in your stomach as opposed to training fasted, especially if we're lifting, right? If you're just going out and doing cardio, I'm totally good. In fact, arguably a proponent of doing fasted cardio. But when it comes to lifting, where we are trying to grow muscle tissue or we're trying to get stronger, I am not a proponent of doing this fasted. Now, with that said, if you are going to wake up, try to force down a meal, you're nauseous, you're queasy because it's the early morning, and then you're just walking into the gym 20 minutes later, your food hasn't even digested. It's not in the bloodstream. It's not helpful. So in a situation like that, oftentimes I'll recommend a liquid meal. So I usually program an intro workout shake consisting of some easy digesting carbohydrates, like a highly branched cyclic dextrin, paired with creatine and some essential amino acids and some electrolytes. And I really like using coconut water as a base because it's loaded with potassium and carbohydrates. So rather than drinking that intra, for someone training early morning, I'll often just move that as their make that their pre-workout meal. So they drink that, 15, 20 minutes ahead of time. And then it's loaded up in the bloodstream. They've got some energy from the carbohydrates. They've got the essential aminos in there, just, keeping them out of that catabolic state as we're potentially breaking down muscle tissue while training. We got the electrolytes and we got the fluids. So now, with that said, if you maybe have a little bit more time on your hands, you could go with something a little bit easier digesting in the whole food realm, something like a cream of rice, throw in a scoop of whey isolate, some honey, some fruit. Personally, that's what I would prefer to do for myself. I like to have something with a little more substance on the stomach, but generally speaking, get some sort of broken down protein source in there, whether it's a powdered whey isolate or whether it's an essential amino acid in a liquid, and then get some easy digesting carbs, either in the liquid powder form or in something like a cream of rice or something like that. Okay, next question here. Retatrutide, its possible impact on insulin resistance, how that affects GH insulin protocols. Yeah, so one of the main benefits of Retatrutide is it's, if you're somebody who's using it more in a physique enhancing realm, a performance enhancing realm, it's not so much about the appetite curbing effects, which that's, for Gen Pop, Retatrutide kind of depressing that appetite along with all the other GLPs is one of the main draws of it. However, if you're somebody who's, a bodybuilder, someone trying to build muscle, the benefits that it can have towards your insulin sensitivity, towards your blood sugar metrics in general, your A1C, fasted blood glucose, all those things, that is where Retatrutide really shines. Now, how it directly affects like GH and insulin protocols, well, I mean, if you're somebody who's using exogenous growth hormone, one of, if not the main drawback of exogenous growth hormone is that it's going to often lead to elevated blood sugar. It's going to make you insulin resistant over time. And of course, that's dependent on how you're using it, how much you're using. But theoretically, if you're somebody who's using Retatrutide, that could probably attenuate some of those negative blood sugar effects from the growth hormone. And then maybe if you're somebody who is using exogenous insulin in a performance enhancing, physique enhancing context, the Retatrutide can give you enough of that insulin sensitivity boost where you don't need to use it. So the more time goes on, the more of a fan I become of the Retatrutide. I think you just need to make sure you're using it at the right time and at the right dose for you. Um, okay, how to train for max hypertrophy in a rebound phase. Okay, it's a good question. So a rebound phase is going to refer to, now you've heard me talk about a reverse diet. There's another approach that some people will take. I've used it myself in the past. I use it with some nutrition clients, and that is a rebound. So in the reverse diet, it's much more of a structured re-implementation of calories, kind of digging ourselves out of the deficit, slowly bringing ourselves back up to maintenance. Now, a rebound is a much more aggressive approach. This is a much more aggressive reintroduction of calories, where rather than going into it with the mindset of, okay, we're just basically restoring you back to maintenance, you're going into the mindset of, we're just hitting the growth phase right out the gate after the fat loss phase. And the argument behind this is, okay, at the end of a fat loss diet, your insulin sensitivity is the highest. Just talked about insulin sensitivity with the Retatrutide. It is a key variable for building muscle. Your appetite is up. You're the leanest you're ever going to be. Your digestion's on point. Your motivation to grow is probably going to be sky high. There are some variables at play here that puts you in a good position to be very receptive to growing muscle. However, you are also in a very fragile state. You're also very receptive to putting on body fat. You're also probably, depending on how lean you got, you're probably very fatigued. You're probably sleeping like crap. You're probably kind of in that walking zombie mode, right? You just finished a fat loss diet and your hunger is way up. So you're much more behaviorally predisposed to going off the rails. You give someone an inch, they take a mile. But anyway, the question as far as training goes. So let's say you're going into a rebound. I tend to tell people to be very careful if they, from a training standpoint, going into a rebound, because you're going to feel like Superman before you actually are Superman, right? Again, at the end of the fat loss diet, your body is in a fragile state. Your fatigue is high. You've lost a lot of the water around the joints. So your joints are predisposed to injury. You're not as strong as you feel once you get the food back in there. So I've seen it many times where guys go into this rebound, they bring in the food, they get their muscle glycogen stores are full, they got the big pumps again, they're feeling great, and they go in there and they hit it super hard in the gym and they get hurt. So I am a proponent of, in the same way that I tend to preach the reverse diet versus the aggressive rebound, I'm also pretty similar with the implementation of training intensity, kind of week to week, start cranking it back up again. Again, every week that goes by post fat loss diet, your body's going to get more restored. You're sleeping better, you're feeling better, you're getting more lubrication around the joints again as you regain some of that body water. All the environmental factors in your body become more suitable for really attacking training. So if you're in that early stages of the rebound, as kind of soft as it sounds to say it, and I'm a guy who loves hard, heavy training, I'd say go with the lighter, higher volume, more pumpy type training, kind of the more Phil Heath, bodybuilding, machine work, sets of 12, 15, not pushing to failure. You'll make gains that way, but that method of training while you're in that fragile post-diet state is going to leave you less predisposed to injury. So good question. Okay, next question. Are peptides or TRT necessary for people over 40 to 45 to get ripped? For untrained individuals, no. I would very rarely say any, performance enhancing drug, so to speak, is necessary. Now, you did make the caveat TRT, which, to be fair, as you get into your late 40s, if you have diminishing testosterone levels, then I would highly recommend you explore the TRT route. Having low testosterone is going to be more detrimental to your health than having your testosterone at the high end of the normal range. Are there some potential, side effects with getting on TRT? Yeah, sure. Every with any medication, any medical treatment approach, there's always going to be a subset of the population that has some, negative side effects to it. But for the vast majority of people getting into their 40s, their 50s who get on TRT, they're going to experience nothing but positives relative to any potential negatives. So is it necessary? Well, not necessarily. If your testosterone levels are still in an adequate place, I wouldn't say it's necessary. But if those testosterone levels are starting to tank, starting to diminish, it becomes more necessary. Now, in terms of peptides, well, peptides is a very broad category. There's a lot of different peptides used for different purposes. So I don't think there's any particular peptide I would consider necessary. Like I would consider TRT a much more important implementation for somebody in that age bracket than any peptide would be. Um, could the peptides have use? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even for somebody using some of the growth hormone releasing peptides, some of the growth hormone secretagogues, CJC, ipamorelin, things like that, that are going to just stimulate your body's endogenous pulsing of growth hormone, especially as you get older. Those can have some real merit. And I mean, if you're overweight, Retatrutide can have, or Ozempic and Tirzepatide, any of these things can potentially have merit. Necessary? Probably not, and much more individual situation dependent. With the peptides, you're sharpshooting a specific issue. With testosterone, you're covering a more just kind of broad, big picture situation. Okay, thoughts on Wendler's 531, boring but big, compared to The Cube by Brandon Lilly. Okay, so of course, I'm intimately familiar with Wendler 531. I'm not sure if the boring but big is kind of a spin-off of that program, or if that was maybe just kind of the original title and I was never aware of that. But so you got 531 and you got The Cube, and these are two pretty popular kind of generic training programs, both written by good coaches, good former powerlifters, Jim Wendler and Brandon Lilly. Both can be effective, absolutely. And with any program on paper, it's to me, it's less about the X's and O's of what you put on paper. It's how you execute it, right? I can write the best program in the world on paper, and I can give it to two separate people. And person A, is going to attack the weight room, train with intensity, train with great technique, train with motivation, and have phenomenal outcomes. Whereas person B might go in there and, technically execute the program as written, but low intensity. They're not pushing themselves. Their movement quality sucks. Their lifestyle variables and diet sucks. And then they don't make progress. So my point is, when it comes to kind of like evaluating these pre-written standalone programs on paper, it's like, are they both competent, sound programming approaches? Yeah, absolutely. You can make gains theoretically on either one of them. What it comes down to really is your execution of it, your buy-in and motivation to it. So when it comes to choosing kind of a generic program, both of these are going to be accommodating the same goal, getting stronger. I would look at them and just kind of based on your own personality, your own interests, which one of these looks like it's going to be more fun to you? Which one of these do you want to go in and you're going to be motivated to do and do well? Right? That's how I would kind of make that decision there. Again, oftentimes it comes down more to quality of execution than it does the X's and O's, as long as you're talking about a competent and sound program. Okay, moving on here. As someone who is 397 pounds and about 46% body fat, what calories should I consume? Okay, so I appreciate you sending the question in. Um, I don't love questions like this, because when it comes to specific calorie intake, this is always going to be so individual for everyone. And this is why I like to work with people one-on-one. For those of you who don't know, what I primarily do is nutrition coaching. I work with one-on-one with a wide variety of people, ranging from, you know, every category of general population, lifestyle clients to pro strongman competitors, powerlifters, bodybuilders, to high rocks athletes. I work with all sorts of people. and being able to dive into your individual metabolism, your individual needs, and really tailor the macros and the food selections and the calories. That's where one-on-one coaching comes in. And if you're interested in my services, you can find that on my website, Hammer Chisel Performance. You can shoot me a DM on Instagram. But to answer your question, what I would say generally is diet on as many calories as you can while successfully losing weight, while successfully losing body fat. I always try to keep food on the higher end. Why? Because more food means more energy for training, better training sessions. Better training sessions means better opportunity to build muscle, better opportunity to burn calories, burn body fat. More food, more recovery resources from those training sessions. More food means the metabolism stays higher longer. More food means you're going to hold off the hunger that's inevitably coming from a fat loss diet. You can hold that off longer. So I would say, start tracking your food, right? Clean up the diet, and then it's a buzzwordy term, clean up the diet, but we all know what that means. Like, let's eliminate the fast food, let's eliminate the junk, the common sense bull crap food. Eliminate that, start tracking your food, set kind of an daily calorie intake, a daily macro intake, or some sort of general parameters for what your daily food intake looks like. Start on the higher end and then track your body weight. If you're losing, don't keep food there, right? If you're losing too quickly, maybe add some food in, right? And then keep going with that amount of food until you hit a plateau, and make sure that your physical output is high. You're walking. I try to get people shooting for 8 to 10,000 steps daily. Get in the gym and train. Diet on as many calories as possible for as long as possible. So that would be my advice to you, or really anyone in a fat loss diet. Okay, Retatrutide dosage you like in a cut. Okay, so one thing I do want to make clear here is I've got a lot of questions about specifics with peptides. I'm not going to go into where to get them. I'm not going to go to specific dosages for you. Again, this can be a one-on-one coaching thing. However, when it comes to a cut, this depends on the individual and why you're using the Retatrutide. If you're dealing with your typical, overweight Gen Pop individual, like I kind of mentioned earlier in the video, the Retatrutide and the GLPs are often used for their appetite suppressing effects. And the dosage to achieve that is going to be kind of different for everyone. I start low, start with a low dose, and then feel how it affects you. And then if your hunger is still booming, it's not doing the job, increase the dose, right? And work your way up until you get to a dose where it's suppressing the appetite adequately, but it's also not just making you feel nauseous and terrible, which that can happen. Now, if you're not in that category, you're not in the overweight individual who just needs to control their appetite. Let's say you're more in the, you're a fit individual who's trying to use it to help with a fat loss diet, getting really lean. Definitely a low dose for sure. We're going to improve your insulin sensitivity. We're going to improve your lipids. You are going to get some of the hunger curbing effects. So like for me, I'll just say what I use. I use 1 milligram every 5th day. That's the half-life of Retatrutide is 5 days. That's what I used during my last diet. And I was not using it for appetite suppressing effects. I was using it for my lipids, my HDL, my LDL, which have just been genetically issues I've had to deal with over the years. And Retatrutide has some fantastic results there. So again, I used 1 milligram every 5th day. It didn't do a ton for my appetite. Like if I was an individual who was using it for appetite control, I would have started working the dose up 1 milligram to 2 milligrams, feel that out. Okay, I'm still starving, go to 3 milligrams. You see a wide range of dosing protocols, but start low, feel it out, increase as needed. Okay, let's see here. Next question. Any thoughts on methylene blue? Okay, so methylene blue is one that I personally have less experience with, but just looking around the landscape, people who are using it, anecdotal reports, looking at the research, I think methylene blue can have some really awesome benefits. And it seems that the biggest benefits from it are going to be more in kind of the nootropic cognitive realm. I'll see people using it, first thing in the morning on an empty stomach before they need to be really productive. Doing it before Q&A like this probably would have been great for me. But I also see reports of, people who use it too much too often, they start to run into some issues. So if you're going to use methylene blue, what I would recommend is use it strategically and only use it a few times a week. Like just use it 2 to 3 times a week in the morning on days where you really want that cognitive boost. You really need to be productive. Start with a low dose and feel it out. Some people feel phenomenal. Some people feel like, whoa, just like kind of overwhelmed. You got to keep in mind, these peptides, everyone's talking about them, everyone's using them now. These are powerful drugs, and not everyone has a positive outcome from this. So start low, start conservative, start infrequent, and I would never get yourself to a point where you were using methylene blue on a daily basis. When it comes to these kind of nootropic, like feel good peptides, you're playing a dangerous game because it becomes very easy to become psychologically dependent on them to where you feel like you can't be productive without it. And that's not a place you want to be. So go into it knowing you're going to limit yourself to, like I said, 2 to 3 times a week. Okay, next question here. Let's see. Best ways to get strong hips / injury prevention. Train your hips in all different planes. Train all the different aspects of the hips. So the hips, it's kind of a ambiguous term, right? So when we talk about training the hips, let's train the glutes, let's train the adductors, let's train the abductors. So I really like using things like Copenhagen planks or the Good Girl machine, the hip adduction machine, to train that adductor. A lot of people don't directly train their adductors. So Copenhagen planks can be fantastic. The bad girl machine, the hip abduction machine, just working that, lateral glute, that lateral hip is going to be good. Doing direct glute work, squats, hip thrusts, things like that. And then I like doing some hip flexor work as well. Another area that tends to go neglected. Like I like doing a single leg hip flexor sit up where I'll get into a decline bench or the decline sit up apparatus, and I'll just go hook one leg in there, lay back as far as I can. You get kind of a big loaded stretch on the hip flexor, and then pulling through that quad. It's going to kind of put a loaded stimulus on the front of that hip and train the hip flexor. You can do a single leg, just cable hip flexor flexion. That training all aspects of the hip flexor, inside of the hip, outside of the hip, backside, just getting well-rounded development is going to be big. And then doing some loaded mobility work is going to go a long way. So training all the different planes, train all aspects of the hip, not only mobilizing them, but also strengthening them. Okay, let's see here. What is the best place to validate nutrition facts? Foods seem different on different sources. So I'm assuming we're talking about like quantifying the calories or the macros in an individual food, and you will see variety, right? If you plug it into MyFitnessPal, you might get a different answer than if you plug it into a different macro tracking app versus the nutrition label might be a little bit different. And the reality is, like even the nutrition labels on food are going to have a window of error, and they can never truly get the exact amount of carbohydrates and fats and calories in any one given food in any one given container of that food. So what I would say is just kind of choose your source, whether it's MyFitnessPal, whatever app you're using, and use that alone. That way you can at least just standardize everything across the board, right? Let's say I'm, eating 50 grams of carbs from white rice, and I've quantified what is 50 grams of carbs worth of white rice via MyFitnessPal. As long as I stick with that, okay, that's my standardized metric, my standardized quantification of 50 grams of carbs from white rice, I can't go wrong. If I drop down to 30 grams of carbs from white rice, well, I know that I have just reduced it by 20 grams of carbs. If I bump it up to 75 grams of carbs of white rice and I'm still using the MyFitnessPal, that standardized tracking metric I've chosen, I know I can't really go wrong with it. So don't use different websites, different apps. Just choose one, standardize it across the board, and you'll be fine. Okay, how do you generate money? Well, I've got a few different income streams. I've got my coaching. That's my primary income, doing my one-on-one coaching. Um, I've got a sponsorship, Troponin Supplements. So I make some money off of the podcast. I make some money off of YouTube. I sell my ebooks. I sell my training programs. So those are my various income streams. Okay, let's see. Next question. How to treat nutrition in season for football? Carb cycling, same calories daily. So when you're dealing with football players, you know, eh, most of these guys are probably not going to follow some complex individualized diet plan. Some of them will, but if you're dealing with a team of 100 guys, especially a lot of them are younger, they have no background ever following a diet. If you try to give them some advanced carb cycling protocol, like on this day it's a high carb day, and this day it's a low carb day, and this day it's a medium carb day, it's going to go over their head. You're going to lose them. So simple is better. If I'm working with a college football player, I'll try to get them eating more carbs, more calories in general on their practice days, on their training days, and eating less on their off days. Just a simple training slash practice day versus off day split, which is technically a little bit of a version of carb cycling. But usually I just try to get them into some level of consistency. Like, hey, let's just get the guy eating 4 meals a day consistently. Let's have the guy building each of those meals around a quality lean protein source. Let's have the guy avoiding common sense junk. Let's have them applying that same consistency to their weekends, not just Monday through Friday. And if we can get that sort of adherence, get them in rhythm there, then we can start getting a little bit more complex. Like, okay, let's really bump the carbs up pre-workout. Let's bump the carbs up pre and post practice. Things like that. Now, if I work with some NFL guys, and with them in their off season, I will get more complex, go into the carb cycling, and we'll use a big high carb day on their biggest training days, or in season here I'll have them do a big high carb load the day before the game, or if it's a night game I'll have them carb load the morning and afternoon leading into it. Then I'll have them do a low carb day the day after the game to pull off some of that inflammation that they accrued from the game itself. But generally speaking, if you're trying to like apply it to a football team in general, especially college, high school, simple is better. Just get them consistent eating food, eating 3 to 4 meals a day, eating decent sources. You start there, you can't lose. Okay, let's see here. How do you choose carb sources? So my food selections are, when it comes to carbs, are pretty simple. I like to go with foods that are minimally processed, single ingredient. You've heard me say it, probably kill it, pick it, grow it foods. If you can hunt it and kill it or fish it, if you can grow it grow it in the ground or pick it out of a tree, it's probably a very safe bet as a food selection. So for carbs, that's going to be white rice, sweet potatoes, russet potatoes, black beans, berries, fruit. Now, oatmeal is processed to a degree, but I like using oatmeal. And then, depending on the individual and the goal, the metabolism, we might bring in some carbs like sourdough bread. If we're deep in a gain phase, we might use some pasta and things like that. But generally speaking, I like going with, like I said, kill it, pick it, grow it carbs, easy to digest, that agree with you. Like some people, they don't digest potatoes well. So I'm not going to have that person eating potatoes. I'm going to probably have them eating white rice. I'm a big fan of cream of rice, especially if you're somebody who has to eat a lot of carbs, right? Cream of rice is just going to be a powdered white rice. It's going to make like a pudding texture, very light on the stomach, easy to eat. I love incorporating fruits. If we're lower calorie, going with berries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries. If we're pushing calories higher, I'll go to some more sugary fruits, banana, pineapple, mango, peaches, papaya, stuff like that. But generally speaking, my base carb sources are going to be white rice, different types of potatoes, oatmeal, cream of rice. And then intra workout, I'll use some liquids like coconut water or highly branched cyclic dextrin. Okay, let's see here. Why not eat a cheeseburger and fries in a gain phase? Because we don't want to get fat. We want to grow muscle. But on a serious note, when it comes to a proper gain phase, we don't want to just be in this untracked, big calorie surplus. And I talk about this all the time. We want a modest, controlled surplus. As soon as we start piling on body fat, our ability to gain muscle quickly diminishes. Our appetite is going to quickly fade. Our digestion is going to go to hell. And if we're just throwing things like cheeseburgers and fries at it, we're going to get into too big of a surplus too quickly. And something like a burger and fries is going to be very heavy in fat and lower in protein and lower in carbs. Like a burger and fries, you're getting some carbs from the bun and the fries, but the main macro you're getting from that is going to be fat. And I've talked about this before. I'm a big proponent of low fat, high carb approaches, especially in a gain phase. We can use the carbs beneficially. We can build a metabolism with carbs. We can fuel training with carbs. We can load glycogen with carbs. Carbs, physiologically speaking, are going to have a much lower chance of being converted into body fat versus a surplus of calories from dietary fat, saturated fat from a fatty burger, greasy, buttery bun, and potatoes deep fried to make French fries. We're going to be getting tons and tons of fat calories, which have a much higher chance of being stored as body fat. And then the more food like that we eat, the more we're sabotaging the digestion, and you're not quantifying the calorie intake. So now we're probably in just a crazy surplus, and you're just going to pile on body fat too quickly. Now, with that said, I do like to utilize a weekly cheat meal where I will eat something like a burger and fries. And depending on who I'm working with, they might have, up to 2 cheat meals a week where they can, have foods like that. But generally speaking, or 100% speaking, I'm never building a bulking phase or gain phase around foods like that within the base plan. Okay, moving on here. As a nutrition coach, what are you doing with clients? Just planning meals, cooking, etc. So, for my nutrition clients, I am building their meal plan for them. And within their plan, I am covering everything ranging from hydration, electrolyte intake, the specific foods they're eating, when they're eating, supplement recommendations, lifestyle tips, dialing in their sleep, their circadian rhythm, their physical activity outside of the gym, all those different things. And I work closely with everyone one-on-one. So, I'll evaluate their goals. I'll evaluate where they're at currently, their current diet, what they've been doing. I'll look at their body composition. I'll kind of make an evaluation of, okay, where do we take the diet right out the gate to start pushing them in the right direction? Some people prefer a macro plan, so I'll do a macro plan for them. Most people I work with, I want to put them on a true meal plan so I can control the food selections, optimize digestion, optimize inflammation, all those different things. So I'll put together a comprehensive meal plan, meal by meal. And then we'll do weekly check-ins where within their check-ins, I'll evaluate body weights from the week. I'll evaluate body composition photos. If it's a physique related goal, I'll evaluate their feedback. Did you execute the diet? How's your energy, your appetite, digestion, sleep? How's training going? Where your hunger levels at? And then based on my evaluation of body weight, of photos, of their feedback, I'll adjust the diet accordingly as we go. So the diet's never set in stone. It's always subject to adjustment from our weekly check-ins as we go. And that's really where kind of the magic of the service comes in, is making the right adjustments along the way to facilitate progress in the right direction. And then to know when it's time to change phases. Okay, we got to end this fat loss phase. We got to build out a reverse diet. Then from there, let's go to maintenance. From there, let's go into a muscle gain phase, or looking at someone and saying, listen, before we even go into a fat loss phase, we got to build up the metabolism, or before we go into a gain phase, we got to pull off some body fat. So my nutrition coaching is making those evaluations, making those decisions, and putting a plan together accordingly. Now, in terms of cooking, I only do actual hands-on cooking and meal prep and stuff like that if I'm working with my pro guys and I'm on site with them. Like, I work with several of the strongest men in the world, the pro strongman competitors, and we had the strongest man on earth competition out in Denver. It's a 2-day competition, and I was on site for those guys, doing their meal prep, doing their cooking, handling their hydration during the competition, handling their meals in the competition. But that's really something I just do for my top pro guys. Okay, let's see here. Moving on. Diet considerations for hyperthyroidism. So, very good question. And I'll just always be honest. And I want to be someone who's just stays in their lane, right? I speak on the things that I feel like I have expertise in, and I'm never going to BS people and try to claim to be an expert in areas that I'm not. And getting into something like medically diagnosed hyperthyroidism or hypothyroidism, that's going to be something where I would, refer you to a physician, or somebody who really deals with populations more in that realm. For me, I try to stay more in my lane of improving physique, improving body composition, improving performance, fueling athletes, fueling more of these lifestyle type of goals, gut health and digestion. When it comes to more of a medical intervention from the nutrition side of things, like I said, I never want to claim to be the expert in that realm, and I would refer you more to someone who that is their area of expertise. So good question, and I wish I had a better answer for you, but this isn't really the platform for that answer. Um, what countries would you like to visit? So I've actually never left the country. I'm embarrassed to admit it. I've got sort of like a weird, like not fear, but hesitation about traveling. I'm a spectacle. I'm 6'7". I stand out. I have tattoos. I'm a big dude. I always get stared at. And I don't know. I feel like going to another country where I don't speak the language, I would just feel that even more. I get a little bit of flight anxiety. But man, I'd love to go to Australia. I'd love to go to Greece. I'd love to go to Italy. And I'm sure I will eventually check those off the list at some point. But yeah, I've been kind of a homebody. I've traveled all over the country, but I've never left the United States. So I'd say Australia. That'd be my number one place to visit. Okay, let's see here. How do you recommend spacing meals out when somebody's working night shift? And there was another question in here as well, kind of, talking about a shift type worker. So something that I recommend, like let's say you're a nurse or you're somebody who's working nights, and then maybe you're working nights a few days out of the week, you're sleeping during the day, but then other days you're off. Like if you're a nurse, you might be working, 3 12-hour night shifts on, and then you got 4 days off, things like that. One thing that you can do is basically just during your wake periods would be try to eat every 2 to 4 hours. So your schedule is going to be shifting all over the place. So rather than having this kind of plan where it's like, okay, on Wednesday, this is the diet, on Thursday, this is the diet, this is meal one, like just kind of think, okay, during my wake periods, I'm just going to try to get a meal in or at least a snack in every 3 hours, 2 to 4 hours. If you're somebody who's got performance or fitness, physique related goals, I try to get people not going longer than 4 hours without eating unless they're using some sort of strategic intermittent fasting. So, like, let's say I'm working a night shift. Okay. As soon as that starts, I'm just trying to get a meal in every 3 hours. Then I sleep during the day. And when I wake up, I'm just kind of going into that cycle again. Just not letting yourself have those long 5+ hour periods where you're not eating. So if you look at it more as just kind of this continuous ongoing period of time as opposed to breaking your week up into like days, because everything gets screwed up when some days you're awake all night, some days you're sleeping during the day, some days you're awake during the day. The concept of like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday kind of changes. So as opposed to looking at it like that, again, just look at it as I'm going to eat every few hours whenever I'm awake for extended periods. And again, this is an area where I'm able to give a better intervention working at a one-on-one coaching capacity where we can really look at your specific schedule and kind of build out a better plan. Okay, let's see here. Peptides that are actually worth taking. So again, when it comes to peptides, like these are things that are going to be sharp shooting specific issues that are going to be solving specific problems, eliciting very specific effects. So it's all about what are you going for? But just to appease the crowd and give some answers here, I think the GLPs have some serious merit, and of course, goal dependent. But the Retatrutide is my favorite at the moment. I think the mitochondrial peptides are showing some real merit in a number of different realms. And as far as mitochondrial peptides go, my interest here lately has been SLU PP332, SS31, and MOTS-C. Those have been the ones that have really kind of piqued my interest here and seem to have a lot of merit. But again, it's kind of how are you using them? And then the healing peptides, BPC 157, TB 500. I'm a little bit on the fence. I will say I think the oral version of BPC 157 might arguably have more merit than the injectable. The oral is really going to do some amazing things as far as your gut health goes. So if you're somebody with a gut issue or IBS, something like that, an oral BPC 157 might be phenomenal. Now, when it comes to like the injectable BPC 157 for accelerating recovery from injury, like I said, I'm a little bit on the fence. Some people report like amazing results. Some people are kind of like, it didn't really seem to help. So, but again, there's a lot of peptides out there. You got the growth hormone releasing peptides, which if you're somebody who has fitness related goals and you're not using the real stuff, real growth hormone, there may be some merit with the CJCs, the ipamorelins, but a lot of this also comes down to like, is the juice worth the squeeze from a financial standpoint? Because when it comes to these peptides, they're not cheap, right? And some of them, in my opinion, it's like, do they have some benefits? Yeah. Is that benefit worth the amount of money you're spending on it? That often is not clear, right? So if you're somebody who's got a ton of money to spend and you want to experiment with some of these things, some of those peptides I just mentioned are all have value. But if money is a factor, you got to be very specific of, okay, what am I going for? What effect am I trying to get from a peptide? And just be much more specific and sharpshooting with it. Okay, let's see here. Let's see. Why don't you recommend bread, flour, etc. on a low fat diet? So again, kill it, pick it, grow it foods. When it comes to optimizing blood sugar, optimizing digestion and inflammation, going with these non-processed single ingredient rice, potato, fruit type sources, your body is going to probably respond better to them, especially if you're eating large quantities. But like I said, we get to a certain point where somebody has to eat a ton of calories. I will use things like a sourdough bread, or a pasta and things like that. But again, I try to use them more sparingly because as we get heavier into gluten-based foods, and I'm not really an anti-gluten guy, but when we're pushing high amounts of gluten, many people have a little bit of a low degree of gluten intolerance. And when you're hammering bread and pasta and things like that, it's going to flare that up. You probably notice, a lot of you probably can relate to this. If you just slam a ton of bread or pasta, you probably feel bloated and sluggish and that's most people, which is why I prefer to build the majority of our carbohydrate intake around, like I said, kill it, pick it, grow it foods, white rice, potatoes, fruit, oatmeal, things of that nature, where people tend to have a better response to it. They're able to eat more of it without any of the digestion, bloating, or blood sugar issues, and without flaring up a potential gluten intolerance. Okay, last question here. And I saved this one for last because this one ruffles my feathers a bit, but it's how rampant is steroid PED use in pro football? So I think there's this misconception that like, oh, all the pro athletes are all using steroids. And you'll see people in the fitness industry, like prominent people in the fitness industry saying that. And I'm like, come on, you've never spent a second in an NFL locker room. What do you know? So I feel like I am somebody who's qualified to speak on this because I've spent lots of time in NFL locker rooms. I grew up in an NFL household. I grew up around the NFL. I was a strength and conditioning coach in the NFL. I played Division I college football. I was a strength coach at the college football level. So I've been around the game for many, many years at the highest levels. But then I've also been on the other side of things in the world where steroids and PEDs are being used rampantly. I've been in the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strongman realm. I've used PEDs myself. I work with a number of strength athletes who are all using steroids. So I'm not one of these guys who's like naive to that world and got my head in the sand when it comes to athletes using anabolics. What I can tell you is when it comes to NFL guys, Division I college football players, very, very, very few of them are actually using anabolic steroids or growth hormone well, actually, some are using growth hormone, but very, very few of them are using anabolic steroids. Okay. In the fitness industry, those interested in the bodybuilding, the powerlifting, the strongman stuff, Olympic weightlifting, we get so used to steroids being this very normal thing, even just in gym culture. Like 99% of steroid users are just recreational gym rats. But in the NFL, it's not happening. Okay. And one thing I'll say is the drug testing for PEDs is really harsh in the NFL. Like I've seen it myself with my own eyes, guys stepping off the game field, still in their pads, being dragged into the bathroom by a third party drug testing agency. And like the drug testing is invasive, it is frequent, it is stringent. And these guys have a lot to lose. And then the other thing is steroids just aren't going to help NFL football players in the way that you think that it is, right? Getting just bigger, that's usually not the factor that's distinguishing NFL football players from, high school football players or guys who never made it, right? For NFL football players, it's just their athleticism, their ability to move in space, their kinesthetic awareness, their ability to change directions, their ability to bend and control their body, being extremely fast, being able to decelerate on a dime, and then just their skills, right? All the varying skill sets that go into playing NFL football. All of these things are totally unaffected by steroids. And in fact, steroids would probably make a lot of these guys worse. They just get bigger and stiffer and bloated. Um, Now, are some of these guys using like party drugs, cocaine and stuff like that? Yeah, these guys do like to party. So I definitely know a lot of these guys in the off season or on some of their bye weekends are probably dabbling in some of that Colombian yayo or, using some recreational party drugs. Pretty much everyone in the NFL is smoking weed. But when it comes to performance enhancing drugs, specifically steroids, it's not happening. It is not happening the way you think it is. And anyone at a high level of football who is using steroids is some guy who's desperate and feels like that's the only shot they have to separate themselves, which again, as you get to the higher levels, none of the guys are that way. These are all athletes who have been phenomenal their entire life. They've never even considered having to use steroids. Now, are some of them using growth hormone in the offseason, or some of them using things like a BPC 157, which has inexplicably been outlawed by WADA? Yeah. Are some of these guys using things that are going to be significantly cognitively enhancing? I've heard of guys using things like Adderall. Hell, I've even heard of guys using things like psilocybin mushrooms before playing because it puts them in this, flow state, things like that. So when it comes to drugs, like I said, party drugs are things that are going to enhance them cognitively and mentally, or things that are going to offer healing benefits, longevity benefits. Yeah, you'll see some of the guys using that, but things like anabolics, man, you really just don't see it in the high levels of football and the high levels of team sports in general. Anyway, guys, so that was the last question. I'm going to wrap it up there. So I'm going to be doing a Q&A like this every 2 to 3 weeks. So stay tuned on Instagram. I'll always, throw it up on my Instagram story when I'm doing the question intake. And guys, if you're liking the content, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It's helping me grow the channel. And the more this channel grows, the more and better content I can continue to put out. So stay tuned. I'm going to be dropping videos 3 times a week. Episodes of the Hammer and Chisel Performance Podcast dropping every Tuesday. And if you want to see more of me, you're interested in my coaching services, my ebook, my training programs, joining Team Hammer and Chisel, my training community, check out my website, hammerchiselperformance.com, or you can go to my Instagram. You'll find all the links in my bio, all that good stuff. So guys, anyway, I really appreciate your support. I've been loving putting out content. You guys have been giving a lot of engagement. It's been a lot of fun for me. So anyway, we'll catch you on the next video.